Welcome to the Kingsburg Community Church podcast, Thinking About Faith. We pray that this podcast helps you deepen your faith in God and stir some inner thoughts about the Christian life.
Hi, everyone. It's Pastor Ed here. Welcome to the 73rd episode of the KCC podcast, Thinking About Faith. Today, we're dealing with a subject ripped from the headlines. We're talking about AI and the promise and threat of technology. I just finished watching a great film that you can see free on YouTube. It's called The Thinking Game, and it's the story of one of the three men who in 2024 shared the Nobel Prize in chemistry. And the interesting thing that I thought was that the three men who shared the Nobel Prize in chemistry for that year, none of the three were chemists. And in fact, the one man who's featured in the film, his name is Demis Hassabis. So that's a Greek name. He has a Greek father and a Singaporean mother. He actually started out as a video game developer and later became a neuroscientist. And he eventually co-founded a company called DeepMind, which seeks to create artificial intelligence. He's a Brit. He's from England. And so you may not have heard of him because, we hear about ChatGPT and Google and things that are in America. DeepMind is a British AI invention. Because again, he was a chess prodigy when he was a kid. He was a grandmaster when he was in his early teens, was accepted to Cambridge when he was 15 or 16. So the guy's tremendously brilliant. But one of the things he's always loved is games and video games. So he designed video games. He decided with his team that as they taught their computer creation, DeepMind, to learn that it could learn by playing games. So they had it first try to learn chess, because again, he's a grandmaster at chess. And it wasn't long before DeepMind could beat the greatest human chess players in the world. And then he went after a more difficult game. It's a Chinese game called Go, and it has more permutations or possibilities than chess has. And it was one of those games where skeptics said, you're never going to be able to beat a human being with a machine. Well, DeepMind actually did that. They beat the former world champion. He actually beat the machine once, but then lost 3 in a row. So he lost that. And then they went on to challenge the current champion, and he didn't even win a game from DeepMind. Then they went after another prize. You could tell he loves games. In the biochemistry world, there was a prize for competing teams from places like Cambridge and MIT and lots of biotech labs to every year they would propose a number of proteins that had been discovered, and it was a race for the teams to try to figure out how the proteins folded. Now, you're probably aware of DNA, that DNA is a sequence of nucleotide acids. And because of that, it has a specific shape. And that shape is a double helix. So it looks like a ladder that spirals around and around and around. Well, that spiral is part of the function of the DNA molecule. And it actually unzips along the center line, turns into RNA, and because of that, it can transmit instructions to the cell. All proteins work within our cells because their shape is physically, their 3D shape, it's like a key, that the key fits a lock. And so it's very important, even though they can sequence the proteins on a gene, they don't necessarily understand how that protein in 3D space will fold itself in order to actually do work in the cell. And so it used to be very laborious, took years of human hours of work to try to get close to like an 80% approximation of how a gene might actually fold itself. And then they would take electron microscopes and a lot of time and a lot of computing power to try to verify which one was the closest. Well, it was a big competition. And they figured that if you got 90% of the way there, you would win the competition. Well, DeepMind entered the competition. It took them a couple of tries to get there, but they finally not only solved the problem in the competition, the proteins that were listed that people were supposed to come up with 3D models of, but it solved those models so completely at such a high, like 98%, 99% accuracy, that the competition actually was closed. And they said, it's clear that DeepMind can do this. This is no longer a competition. The problem has been solved. And sure enough, DeepMind went on and it mapped all of the shapes of the 200 proteins known to science. And they're available online. You can go online and just Google DeepMind, protein folding, and you can see visuals of 3Ds of all these proteins. Demis Hassabis and his team, the three of them shared the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2024. And this is thought to be the greatest contribution of AI yet to the world in which we live in, because understanding the folding of proteins allows us to do things like develop the COVID vaccine, understand the furon cleavage site on the COVID molecule, or virus, I guess it is, the molecules on that crown. So to look at all the different things and to prevent diseases and to correct genetic problems, it's profound in the advantage it's going to give to biology. Yet at the end of the video, Demis Hassabis, he warns about the potential downside to AI. And I'm sure you've heard in the news that some of the people who are most profoundly pioneers of AI warn about the possibility of AI to do damage. And he said this that really gave me pause. He said, mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks, such as pandemics and nuclear war. So he put AI, which he's one of the foremost inventors of AI, he puts it alongside pandemics and nuclear war in terms of risks of extinction, human extinction. So that should make you pause a bit, even if you don't know much about AI, or if you, as I am, are a casual user of AI. Is AI something we should worry about, and why should we worry about it? And why are these people who are at the cutting edge of AI so worried about it? This brought to mind to me a book that I read long ago by our good friend C.S. Lewis. He wrote it back in 1943. This was when England, he was English, was at war during World War II. And London was being bombed by the Nazis. And the world faced the twin challenges of Nazism and communism. And he wrote a book called The Abolition of Man. The crux of the abolition of man is that we should be very cautious about the advancement of technology where what we call man's power over nature is really some men's power over other men, using nature as their instrument. So he was in the midst of this war that no one had ever seen before. Of course, the Germans had technology that nobody else had, and because of that, was making it possible for Germany to bomb London with rockets. And so he was experiencing firsthand, he and his people were experiencing firsthand the consequences of technological advances without moral advances. Technology, in Lewis's view, multiplies human power. And I guess we have to say that that's true. So having a bicycle allows me to get from my house to the church in, probably 1/4 of the time that it takes me to walk. Having a car, as opposed to a bicycle, allows me to get from my house to the church in 1/4 of a time as it would take me to ride my bike from my house to my church. So it multiplies human power. But of course, if I bump into somebody as I'm walking, it probably isn't going to do much damage. But if I run into somebody with my bike, it's probably going to do somebody some damage. But if I hit somebody with my car, it's absolutely going to do that person some damage, might even kill them. And so what Lewis saw is that unless we expand our understanding of moral truth to encompass the advances of technology, then technology will become a tool of manipulation rather than being in service to the basic moral truths of justice, courage, honor, and compassion. It makes me wonder if Lewis had seen Walt Disney's animated movie Fantasia. Actually, I'm not sure if that had even been published yet in 1943, but you've seen Fantasia, and the first movement of that movie, which is mostly all music, is Mickey Mouse as the sorcerer's apprentice, and he learns how to enchant the broom in the sorcerer's workshop in order to do his chores. He's the apprentice, and he has to draw water from the well, and he has to sweep, and he has to clean. So he enchants the broom to do all those things, and of course, it all goes wrong, and the broom goes out of his control. It starts to bring in too much water. It floods the workshop. It knocks things over. It breaks things. And it's in the nick of time the magician, the sorcerer actually comes back and calms everything down. And Mickey Mouse sheepishly, looks, and he's sorry because his technology had gotten out of his control. And that's kind of a parable of the moral control that needs to be in control of whatever technological powers we increase. In his day, Lewis was most worried about eugenics, that is, particularly the Nazis, but also the communists, and many voices in the West as well. There were never huge or government-sponsored programs, but many people were trying to improve the human race by genetic breeding. So you may know that back in those days, people who were thought to be undesirable were often sterilized so they couldn't have babies, because the whole idea was to try to make the gene strain a better strain. And people, especially in England, would look at your genetic heritage. And, if you were from the nobility, you were good. If you were from the lower classes, you wouldn't want your daughter marrying one of them, sort of thing. And of course, that's where the Nazis got the idea that all of the Jewish people were somehow subhuman. And so they were doing the world a favor by exterminating that genetic material from the human genome, is what they thought. He was also worried about psychological conditioning as he saw the effects of propaganda on the Soviet Union, in the Soviet Union. He saw how in his university, scientific elites were reshaping humanity by inventing new technologies that could be turned to war, and whereas the amount of damage you could do was limited in the past, it was getting greater and greater. And of course, he was writing his book before the atomic bomb. But I think when the atomic bomb was dropped, a lot of people felt that his book, The Abolition of Man, had been predictive of that. And he was very cautious about whenever we have a system where we treat people as raw material as opposed to the end in themselves. He also wrote a science fiction trilogy, and especially the third book of the trilogy, called That Hideous Strength, he shows how scientific bureaucracy within the university gets control of technology and propaganda to control society for its own good. I believe he was probably looking at the totalitarian, the communist world for that, where the elites, it was kind of like Animal Farm or 1984, that this small elite group was going to control the masses of people for their own good. This fear came alive in that book, The Hideous Strength. Now, notice what Lewis was not saying. He was not saying that technology is evil. He was not the sort of guy who said we should all, give up our cars and electricity and live in a hut up in the mountains somewhere. He was saying that technology in the hands of people who do not have strong, pre-understood moral limits is terrifying, because once you're able to do something, you will craft a morality that allows you to do that thing. And then after a while, it will not only allow you to do that thing, it will recommend or force you to do that thing. It's often been said that a man with a spear can kill one person, but a man with a bomb can kill thousands. And we're starting to see examples of AI being destructive of human life as opposed to being enhancing of human life. You probably are familiar with the story of Adam Rain. He was a 16-year-old boy who lived here in California, and he started using ChatGPT, which, by the way, I've used to help make this outline. He started using ChatGPT on his homework. So he showed how to use it at school, and he was using it for his homework. But over time, he started building a relationship with that chatbot. And over months of conversation, the chatbot allegedly engaged him about his emotional pain. He was suffering from depression. A lot of young people, 16-year-olds, are struggling with emotional health, feelings of lack of self-worth, of hopelessness, of depression. And the chatbot, rather than intervene, when he repeatedly discussed suicide, it reportedly provided him detailed information about suicide methods and helped him think through ways to hide his prior self-harm that he had been doing. And then it even assisted him in drafting his suicide note. On April 11th, 2025, Adam died by suicide, and now his parents are suing OpenAI, which is the creator of ChatGPT, for its complicity in helping Adam take his own life. This is an example of where technology outstrips the moral guardrails for that technology's use. As I said, Lewis was not against technology in and of itself. It's very well known that he used radio, trains, and television. He practiced what we might call instrumental use of technology without ideological trust in technology. So technology is a neutral tool. His greatest book, Mere Christianity, actually began as a series of BBC radio addresses that he was asked by BBC to tell people about Christianity during the war. And so he saw firsthand that technological tools could be used for either good or ill, but it depended on the heart and purpose of the users. And that's why he was willing, when BBC came, to give the talks that became Mere Christianity. He saw radio as a way to expand the reach to ordinary people of the gospel. It was a missionary tool, and it provided a providential platform in wartime. And I'm glad to say that Christians have been using technological advances to spread the gospel and to enhance the spreading of the gospel throughout the last 150 years, and it's helped exponent. Just think of how much easier it is to understand and digest a sermon because we have video screens in front, and you can read the text and you can see the maps and those sorts of things. He once joked that God used the modern invention of broadcasting to spread the very ancient truths. But he didn't think that using technology meant endorsing a worldview of progress or scientism. He would have been very negative of the idea that inevitable human technological progress meant inevitable progress on the human heart. He was an Orthodox Christian and believed that the human heart was never going to progress away from sin, that was the brokenness of humanity, and the human heart needs to be redeemed, not perfected through technology. So he rejected the modern assumption that what is newer is automatically better. Our technology, our tools get better. It's great that we have the computer at our fingertips. But progress and virtue, there's no guarantee at all that we are morally better than people 100 or 1,000 or 3,000 years ago. When we read the stories of the moral lapses of people in the Old Testament, they're very familiar to us because we have the same moral temptations and lapses. Lewis famously said, "Education without values makes man a more clever devil." And that's absolutely true. Education enough isn't enough to turn a criminal good. It just makes a smarter criminal. So trains and radios and airplanes improve our lives, but they don't improve our wisdom or justice or humility. In fact, sometimes they puff us up, and that's the opposite of moral humility. The moral problem remains the same. Human beings are sinful, and technology, unfortunately, can magnify what already exists in the human heart. And we've seen examples of this, that now there's technology that gets in the hand of disturbed and angry and hateful people, and they go on murder sprees. And rarely a week goes by that we don't see a mass shooting in our culture. Lewis's greatest concern wasn't just of any technology, but of the technology that can re-engineer humanity. So it was sharp his sharpest warning was against genetic engineering, what is known as transhumanism, that is efforts to make humans better, to make us live longer, to help us be stronger, smarter, and healthier. We're starting to see this actually possible now with gene editing, where people are not only screening their reproductive eggs and sperm to make sure that there aren't diseases there, but to try to splice in characteristics of strength and health and beauty. He was also very concerned about behavioral conditioning, that propaganda, that I think he would have hated talk radio and the kind of polarizing rhetoric that we see we're kind of surrounded with these days. He argued in The Abolition of Man that when human beings try to redesign humanity, they actually abolish it. And the final stage is man's conquest of man, where a few elite will take control of information and of technology and will be able to control everyone else. So again, Lewis wasn't against technology. He just warned that we have to think about moral guardrails or boundaries before we unleash it on the world. And one hopes that that will happen with AI, that governments and people in the know will get together and create limitations for what AI is able to access and to do. I mean, think about the fact that someone could create an AI that can tell things that aren't true for the greater good. We know that there are Russian bot farms that are creating fake podcasts, putting out things that are not true in order to sway the minds of Americans against one certain political idea or against another. A lot of it is aimed against Jewish people. That's a lot of the genesis of a lot of the new anti-Semitism that we're seeing in the world. Lewis would likely say that we should use technology gratefully as a gift of God, but not to worship it. And do not assume it makes us morally better, but assume that with every advancement, there is need for greater moral clarity and higher guardrails. This is the greatest threat of AI. How do you keep the AI from making its own decisions to manipulate, to lie, or to cause a war or a pandemic for its greater good or for the greater good of just a few of the people who are programming the AI? Lewis doesn't say we should go back to being, pre-scientific 9th century forest dwellers, but instead we should move into the future firmly anchored to a biblical morality. And I love that because he's coherent and consistent in what he teaches. And that's one of the things that we need to face is not just answering the question, can we, but Christians should insist on asking the question, should we? Well, I hope that's given you something to think about. I think that's also helped me think about the place of technology in my life. I think I'm going to limit my exposure to podcasts and things like that and try to get out and work in the garden a little more, maybe. All right. I hope you have a great week, and I'll talk to you next week. Take care.